Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to head back, way back actually, to the literal foundations of, well, what we call civilization.
Yeah, we're digging into the earliest big societies, specifically Mesopotamia,
Yeah,
Sumer.
all those city-states.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then Egypt, which was quite different, unified, ruled by a pharaoh, seen as a god.
So two models right from the start. Fragmentation versus unity.
And our mission today isn't just to list kings and battles. We want to get underneath that.
Right. We're looking at the basic trade-offs, the real costs, social, environmental, that allow these complex centralized states to even happen.
We're trying on some really interesting research here, stuff that pushes back against the idea that this was all just progress.
Because it wasn't simple, was it? This jump wasn't just purely good.
Not at all. It seems it was a necessary move, maybe, driven by specific circumstances, tech, environment.
Sure, it gave us incredible things: bureaucracy, writing, law, science.
But the sources are pretty clear. The flip side was immediate and, frankly, brutal. Massive hierarchies, oppression, suffering on a scale not really seen before.
So what you need to get right away is that this wasn't some philosophical shift. People didn't just decide they wanted kings all of a sudden.
No, it was fundamentally about logistics. It started with food, a reliable, huge surplus of food. That was the seed.
And everything else, the politics, the religion, the armies that grew up around managing and protecting that surplus.
That's the core idea, the superstructure built on a foundation of grain.
Okay, so let's unpack that shift. Moving away from hunting and gathering, what exactly kicked it off? What were the specific things that let people settle down in big groups for the first time?
There's this concept the sources talk about, the Neolithic Package. It's kind of the starter kit for civilization.
Right, the essential tech.
Exactly. And it wasn't just one invention. It was a whole set of things coming together, mostly in the Fertile Crescent.
When are we talking, roughly?
It really solidified over a long period, maybe between 8,000 and 6,000 BCE. So quite early. It's the moment you get all the pieces needed for large-scale, settled life.
Okay, so break down this package for us. What are the key ingredients?
Well, first, and this is crucial, you get the right plants. Domesticated cereals, mainly wheat and barley.
High calories, good for storage. Makes sense.
Yeah. But just as important were the legumes, things like lentils, peas, chickpeas, and something called bitter vetch.
Legumes.
Okay.
For variety in the diet. Or something else.
Both, really. Nutritionally, yeah, they fill in gaps that grains alone don't cover. Keeps people from getting sick on just carbs.
Ah, okay. Balanced diet, even back then.
But the really clever bit, agriculturally speaking, is that things like bitter vetch, they fix nitrogen in the soil.
Oh, right. Like natural fertilizer.
Exactly. Without understanding modern chemistry, they stumbled onto a way to keep farming the same plots year after year without totally depleting the soil. That's huge for staying put.
So sustainability was baked in from the start, almost by accident.
You could say that. It allowed for that permanent farming, which you absolutely need for stable, dense populations. It's kind of the unsung hero.
Got it. Cereals for bulk, legumes for nutrition and soil health. What else was in the package?
The animals. The right animals. Almost immediately after the plants, you get the key livestock showing up.
Goats and sheep first, I imagine.
Goats and sheep, yeah. Meat, milk, wool, very useful, and then a bit later, pigs and cattle.
So when you put it all together, the specific grains, the specific legumes, and these four main livestock types.
That's it. That's the complete toolkit, the full suite of domesticates needed to really launch things.
And this combination, this whole setup, is what the academics call the decisive agricultural revolution.
Right, because now the environment managed this way could reliably produce way more food than the people working the land needed just for themselves.
And that excess, that surplus, that's the game changer.
That is absolutely the core concept. The ability to create and store a grain surplus. Grain lasts, right? If you keep it dry, keep the pests out.
For years, potentially.
Which meant, for the first time, maybe, 10, 20% of the population didn't have to farm or hunt or gather.
They could do other stuff.
And this is where it connects directly to all those things we call civilization.
Because the surplus is like stored energy, stored wealth.
Precisely. It's wealth you can use to feed people who aren't producing food.
Okay.
Specialists.
So if you don't need everyone out in the fields.
Suddenly you've got people free to become priests, or scribes, or builders working on big projects, or, crucially, administrators, people managing the surplus itself.
The first bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Funded by barley.
You joke, but yeah, it made art possible, literature, science, organized religion. All of it rests on that foundation. Someone has to have the time to do those things.
It's that fundamental shift from everyone being a generalist food producer to having dedicated roles.
That's the dividing line between a small village where everyone farms and a city where you have this complex web of different jobs, all supported by the farmer's surplus.
Okay, so stability, surplus, specialization. It sounds great, like
Yeah.
purely positive. But the research you mentioned paints a much darker picture right from the start.
Yeah, it's the fundamental paradox, isn't it? The great irony. Agriculture enables all this complexity we admire, but it immediately creates conditions for things the sources call new evils, problems that seem to have been much less common or maybe just different in hunter-gatherer groups.
Okay, like what are these downsides?
Well, the list is pretty grim. You get entrenched social hierarchy, real formal class structures, not just temporary status.
Rich and poor, basically. Rulers and ruled.
Yes. And with that comes formal oppression. Systems designed to keep people in their place. Institutionalized slavery becomes a feature.
Slavery right from the start.
Seems so. And then organized, endemic warfare. Not just small skirmishes, but states fighting states. And, maybe counterintuitively, famine.
Famine. But they had surpluses. How does that work?
Think about it. Hunter-gatherers rely on diverse food sources. If one fails, they move or switch. Early farmers, they put all their bets on a few crops, often genetically very similar.
Monocultures.
Vulnerable.
Highly vulnerable. To drought, to pests, to floods. If the main crop failed, you had disaster on a massive scale. And when that
Yeah,
happened...
the surplus wasn't shared equally.
Exactly. It got distributed according to that new hierarchy. The people at the bottom suffered most. Elites might tighten their belts. The poor starved.
So the very thing that allowed the society the stored grain also created the mechanism for unequal suffering during crises.
You've got it. As soon as you have that valuable stored asset, you need someone to guard it, manage it, distribute it. And that authority, almost by definition, creates inequality.
Wow. And we actually see evidence of this downside in the bones, right?
We do. It's quite stark sometimes. You compare skeletal remains from early farming communities to their hunter-gatherer neighbors or ancestors.
What's the difference? Often, you see a drop in average height. More signs of malnutrition, like enamel hypoplasia on teeth. Way more cavities, actually, from the high-carb grain diet.
So less healthy overall.
Individually. Often, yes. Plus, living packed together with domesticated animals. That's a recipe for infectious diseases. Zoonotic diseases jumping from animals to humans. Epidemics become a real threat.
So shorter lives, more disease, more cavities. It doesn't sound like a great trade for the average person.
For the average person, it might have been a pretty bad deal, health-wise, which leads to this, what the sources call the evolutionary success paradox.
Meaning?
Meaning, despite all the individual suffering, the plagues, the malnutrition, the famines that killed millions prematurely.
The population exploded.
Massively. The sheer food-producing capacity of that Neolithic package, even with all its flaws, allowed for exponential growth. There are, nearly 6 billion more people alive today? That's a direct consequence.
So from a species perspective, maximizing numbers, it was a huge win.
A spectacular success. But the cost, measured in individual human lives and well-being, especially in those early millennia, was immense.
Okay, so the surplus didn't just allow specialization. It kind of forced the creation of hierarchies to manage everything. The food, the people, the land.
Right. Management becomes essential.
But you mentioned earlier the really obvious signs of power, like kings, big monuments, armies. They didn't pop up instantly with the first farms.
No, that's a key point from the archaeology. There's a significant lag time. The Neolithic package is pretty much locked in by, say, 6000 BCE.
But the pyramids and ziggurats come later.
Much later. We start seeing clear evidence for, really rich burials showing distinct elites maybe around 2500 BCE in the Near East, and solid evidence for actual kings, written laws, standing armies. That's even later, maybe 2500 BCE.
Wait, that's a gap of 3,500 years?
Roughly, yeah. It's huge.
So what was happening in between? If they had the surplus, why didn't kings immediately take over?
Well, the thinking is it was a slow burn, a gradual transition. You probably went from basically egalitarian villages to slightly more complex chiefdoms, societies with ranking.
Not full-blown states yet.
Not yet. In that early period, the surplus might have been managed more locally, maybe by temple communities, religious figures. We see early accounting tools like clay tokens, seals, ways to track grain going in and out.
So administration started small, maybe tied to religion.
It seems likely. Decentralized, focused on the practicalities of storage and redistribution. It took a long, long time for that localized sort of administrative control to morph into centralized, coercive political and military power.
So the state wasn't the start of managing the surplus, it was the end result of figuring out how to manage it.
In a way, yes. The big walls, the armies fighting between cities, like in Sumer, those came after. The systems for managing resources were already quite developed. They represent the consolidation of power over those systems.
So maybe the first powerful figure wasn't a warrior, but an accountant, a priest accountant.
Huh. That's actually not a bad way to put it. The initial spark was practical. Manage the water, manage the grain, manage the workers.
And the king was the guy who eventually figured out how to take control of that whole system and use force to keep it.
That seems to be the trajectory. The administrative infrastructure had to be built first, almost, before it could be captured and scaled up into what we recognize as a state.
Okay, managing labor. That brings us to maybe the roughest part of this whole structure.
Yeah.
Slavery. You mentioned it earlier. It sounds like it wasn't just incidental, but fundamental.
It really does seem central, yeah. Especially when you look at Mesopotamia and Egypt, the sheer scale of what they built. The irrigation works, the city walls, the ziggurats, the temples, eventually the pyramids.
Couldn't get that done with volunteers working weekends.
Not even close. The state elites, the kings, the priesthoods, they had these monumental ambitions, partly for defense, partly for religious reasons, partly just for demonstrating power. And that required absolutely staggering amounts of labor.
And the sources are pretty blunt about who did the worst jobs.
They are. They talk about a forced proletariat, essentially. And this group was assigned what's described as degrading drudgery, the hardest, most dangerous, often lethal work.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about the absolute essentials. Digging and, crucially, dredging the irrigation canals. That's constant, back-breaking work in the mud and water, vital for the agriculture.
Keeping the whole system from silting up.
Exactly. Then there's the mining and quarrying for stone, often far away, dangerous conditions. Felling timber, also often remote and hazardous.
Hauling all that stuff back.
Carting heavy materials, yes, and making bricks. Endless, repetitive, physically crushing work, making mud bricks by the million. Also things like rowing warships or cargo boats.
Basically all the heavy lifting infrastructure and resource extraction. The jobs that literally build and maintain the state, but are also the most likely to kill you.
That's precisely it. These tasks underpin the state's survival, its agricultural base, and the ability of the elites to live in luxury and construct their symbols of power.
And there was a political logic to using slaves for this, beyond just getting the work done cheap.
Oh, absolutely. A very calculated, ruthless logic. The state leadership wasn't stupid. They knew these jobs. The quarrying, the canal dredging were incredibly harsh, high mortality rates, awful conditions.
And if you forced your own free citizens, your taxpayers, to do that.
You risk rebellion. Serious unrest. People push too far will push back. So the sources suggest the strategy was to create and maintain this separate class.
A buffer class.
A disposable and replaceable proletariat, as one source puts it. By forcing this group, captives, foreigners, debt slaves, whatever their origin, to do the deadliest jobs, the state insulated its core population of free subjects.
It prevents insurrectionary pressures, as the source said. Keep your own citizens happy enough, or at least not push to the absolute limit, by making someone else suffer the worst.
It's cynical but effective political management. You create a category of human beings whose suffering doesn't destabilize your rule, whose deaths don't cause political problems among the majority.
Wow. Disposable people.
It sounds horrific, and it was. One analysis explicitly compares these state labor projects, with their gang labor, overseers, and high death rates, to an early gulag. State-controlled zones of extreme exploitation.
And you mentioned earlier, sometimes this wasn't even domestic slavery initially.
Right. There's evidence, especially for early Mesopotamian states, that were poor in resources like stone and good timber.
Yeah.
They didn't have them locally.
So they traded for them.
They traded for them, which meant, effectively, they were importing the results of that brutal labor without having to manage the laborers directly.
Outsourcing the drudgery, as the source says. Let some other society deal with the dangers of mining or logging and the potential unrest from the workers.
Exactly. So whether it's direct internal exploitation via slavery or indirect exploitation via trade, the fundamental principle is the same. The state finds ways to get the essential, dangerous work done while deflecting the associated risks away from its core supporters.
That's a really deep insight into state formation. The ability to manage or offshore existential labor risk is a core component of maintaining power. Okay, so we've got the physical pillars, water, grain, forced labor. But states don't run on bread and fear alone, right? There's ideology, belief.
Absolutely. And this is where Egypt offers such an incredibly rich case study, partly because it was so unified compared to Mesopotamia.
A god king.
The divine pharaoh. That centralization meant the entire civilization was profoundly oriented around a shared complex belief system, especially concerning death and the afterlife.
So that massive grain surplus wasn't just feeding soldiers and canal diggers.
It was also feeding a huge class of priests, scribes, artisans, embalmers. Everyone needed to support this elaborate spiritual architecture.
And it wasn't just about the pharaoh's ego, was it? His successful afterlife journey was tied to the whole state's well-being.
That was the core belief. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was the guarantor of Ma'at cosmic order, truth, justice. His successful passage to the afterlife ensured the Nile would flood, the harvests would come, Egypt would be stable. It was literally a matter of national security.
So the preparations for his death and the deaths of the elite were state projects of the highest importance.
Incredibly extensive preparations. They believed death was just a transition, but a dangerous one. You needed a safe passage to get to the next world and ensure a comfortable eternity.
And you couldn't just wing it. You needed instructions, a guidebook.
You needed help, which is where we get things like the funerary texts, famously known today as the Book of the Dead.
Now, that wasn't really one single book, was it?
No, not like a Bible or Quran. It's more a modern term for a whole collection, a repertoire of spells, prayers, hymns, declarations.
Written where?
All over. On tomb walls, sarcophagi, papyrus scrolls buried with the deceased. Different people might have different collections of spells depending on their status and wealth.
And the point of these spells? To navigate the dangers of the underworld.
Exactly. The journey was seen as perilous, full of hostile demons, tricky gateways, tests. These spells were like cheat codes, magical defenses, how to appease gods, how to answer questions correctly, how to transform yourself to bypass obstacles.
Spiritual protection.
A vital insurance policy for the soul, or the different aspects of the soul, like the Ba and Ka. But it wasn't just about magic. The whole journey led to a final, ultimate test.
The big one. The weighing of the heart.
The weighing of the heart. This is maybe the most iconic image from the Egyptian afterlife texts.
So describe the scene. What happens?
The deceased stands in the Hall of Two Truth before Osiris, lord of the underworld, and a panel of divine judges. Anubis typically leads them in.
And the scales.
A set of scales. On one side, the heart of the deceased, which for the Egyptians was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and crucially, conscience.
The record of your life.
Essentially, yes. And on the other side,
The feather.
the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, order, righteousness, the way things should be.
And the moment of truth. If your heart, heavy with sin, outweighs the feather.
Uh-oh. If it's heavier, it means you lived a life contrary to Ma'at. You failed the test. And the heart is immediately tossed to Amit.
The devourer. Part crocodile, part lion, part hippo.
That's her. A terrifying composite monster waiting by the scales. She eats the heart, and that's it. Annihilation. The second death. No afterlife for you.
But if it balances,
Yeah.
if your heart is as light as the feather of truth,
Then you are declared true of voice, vindicated. You've lived a righteous life, or at least you can make the case you have through declarations of innocence also found in the texts. You've passed the test.
and you get to proceed to the Egyptian version of paradise.
You are welcomed by Osiris into the afterlife, the field of reeds, a blessed existence. So the whole ritual, its explicit purpose, was a moral judgment. Did you live a good life?
It's a profound ethical system embedded in this complex cosmology. But tying it back.
Tying it back, this entire incredibly detailed spiritual and ethical system needing scribes, priests, artists, builders, enormous resources for the tombs and rituals, it only works. It's only possible because the agricultural engine is churning out enough surplus to pay for it all.
The grain feeds the bureaucracy of the afterlife.
Exactly. The specialization that the grain surplus allows creates the religious specialists, and their work, in turn, reinforces the divine authority of the pharaoh and the whole social order, justifying the very system, including the labor control that produces the grain. It's a feedback loop. #tag outro.
Wrapping this deep dive up.
Yeah.
It seems the story of the first civilizations is, well, complicated. You need that specific Neolithic package, the right plants, animals, tech to get started.
That's the engine. High-yield, sustainable agriculture.
But that engine, the moment it starts running efficiently, it seems to immediately create hierarchy, social stratification.
Almost inevitably, yeah. The surplus needs managing, and management creates power differences.
And that leads pretty quickly to systems of control, including brutal labor regimes like slavery, partly for efficiency, but also as a deliberate political strategy to keep the elites safe from unrest.
That outsourcing of drudgery seems key to monumental building and political stability.
And yet, that same surplus, that same system, also funds the specialists who create incredible intellectual and spiritual worlds, like the detailed Egyptian vision of the afterlife, guided by the Book of the Dead.
The specialization cuts both ways. It enables both oppression and incredible creativity.
So looking at both Mesopotamia's city-states and Egypt's unified kingdom, the common thread seems to be control. Control of water, control of food, and control of the labor needed for both.
That really does seem to be the foundational spark for complex administration, doesn't it? The practical need to manage essential resources and the people involved.
Which brings us to the final question for you, the listener, to think about. If the very first states, the prototypes for everything that followed, were built on this fundamental link between controlling resources, food, water, labor, and maintaining political power.
What does that tell us about power today? How much of modern political authority, even in vastly different systems, still ultimately rests on controlling critical resources, whether that's energy or data or food supply chains or access to capital?
Is that ancient link between resource control and state power still the bedrock, just hidden under more complex layers?
And think about that connection between religion and power, too. We saw how, from the beginning, divine authority was used to justify the control of resources and people. How do those two forces, belief and control, still interact and reinforce each other today?
Lots to chew on there. Looking at the deep past certainly makes you look at the present a bit differently.
It really does. The patterns are remarkably persistent.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Join us next time as we continue excavating the origins of the world we live in.